Hey, my name is Ben. Thanks for stopping by. Today I'm going to be showing you how to do an R410A flare. This flare in particular is going to be used for a mini split air conditioner system. And you can see this line set here came with a standard flare already made up. But you can see if you look closely at this flare, it's not very high quality. You can see a lot of scratching and just kind of inconsistent look to the inside of this flare. So we're going to be redoing this for two reasons actually. One, obviously, is because this flare isn't the best, but then also because they want us to use the OEM flare nut that came with the mini split. So this is the nut that we're going to be installing, so we'll be removing this standard nut here. So the first thing, obviously, that you're going to have to do for doing a flare is to trim back your copper pipe. So we're going to cut this back just a little bit, and we're going to cut it back far enough here that we're past any imperfections or nicks in the pipe. And it looks like there's a nick right there, so right about there is going to be where we're going to cut our pipe. Now, using a high quality pipe cutter like this one is a good idea with a sharp blade, because we want to cut this with as minimal deformation to the pipe as possible. We don't want to crush it as we're cutting it. So I like to just get it just barely to the point where it's starting to touch, and then begin rotating it around. And we're just going to rotate it 3 or 4 times and then tighten it just a little bit, and do that process until we get this cut completed. So it could take us a couple minutes to do this, but by going really slow, it's going to reduce the amount of burrs that are inside of that pipe. I can feel that we're almost through. Should fall off momentarily. There we go. Now if we take a quick close look, you can see that we don't have much of a burr on the inside. There's a little bit there, but not a whole lot. And so we're actually not going to even use a deburring tool to deburr this, because it's so small. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my needle nose pliers, lock our focus there so you guys can see really well, and we just push our needle nose into the pipe a little bit and gently ream it out, and that'll just kind of extend that burr outward instead of trying to trim it off. We're just not really going to need to do that with this tiny of a burr. But if you needed to deburr it, you could either use a standard deburring tool or very carefully take a knife and clean that burr off the inside just like this, and obviously have the pipe pointed in a direction where the burrs are not going to fall into the pipe for obvious reasons. So I'll go ahead and ream it out just a little bit more. Now, you don't want to ream it out too much before you put the flare nut on, or else it won't go on properly. So go ahead and slide this flare nut on. Now, since this is an R410A flare, it is going to be a wider flare, just slightly. So the outside dimension of the flare is a little bit bigger when we're done. But the most important part is just getting this. I gotta pull the copper out of this pipe a little more. The most important part is keeping that inside scratch-free and damage-free as we go through the process of flaring this. So I'm just going to ream this out a little bit more. Alright, now I'm ready to go ahead and do the flare. Now the flaring tool that we're going to be using is an eccentric flaring tool. I believe that's how we're supposed to pronounce it. But this type of flaring tool basically has a rotational motion that kind of goes around and presses the flare into the die in a circular motion. Instead of it just like pushing it out directly with the cone, it kind of rolls it out into the die, and so it tends to do a lot better job at making a nice clean inner surface than a standard typical flaring tool will. So I'd recommend picking up one of these over the standard ones if you can. I'll put a link in the description to this tool as well as any other tools related to this process. So we're going to go ahead and choose our 3/8 inch size and get that set over our pipe. So here's our 3/8 size. Now we're going to extend this through about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch. Now this kind of takes a little bit of learning. It's kind of silly, but that is the amount of material that we want to ultimately flare outward. So you kind of get the feel of this over the years of doing it, and if you end up with one that's too far out, the cone will be too big and your flare knot won't go over it, or if you end up with one that's too small, you'll obviously see that it's too loose inside of there. So the instructions for R410A say to extend it out a tiny bit further, so basically they want that cone to be a little bit larger. So we're going to go just right about there. We're going to go with right about an 1/8 inch past the face of the pipe. And we'll take our flaring tool, slide it over, and now we just line that up. You can see these dimples here in the tool, and that is where we need to get this set and tighten it down. And then that will squeeze it together over the copper. And we do tighten it until it's all the way seated. So you can see right there, it is all the way seated. Maybe we can go a tiny bit more. Right there. Yep, so it's all the way tight there. So now we'll go ahead and do the flare. You guys can see that point coming down. There it's made contact. You'll see it start to roll that copper out and around. Let's see if I can get you a little bit better view. Now the cool thing about this flare tool is that it tightens down until you've reached the required torque, and then when you keep rotating the handle, it continues to roll that tip of the flaring tool around, which just helps continue to smooth out and make that flare better. Alright, so that's about it. Now we'll back it out. And release our handle. There it is. So see, yep, we succeeded perfectly. It slides over there really nice. See if I can get you a good look at the end of it. See that? See how nice and smooth it is on the inside? There's no scratches or other blemishes that will cause our seal to fail. Well, let me just show you this in comparison to the factory one that came on this line set, which is just egregious. Absolutely egregious. See all the scratches and marks from that flare? You would have had to tighten that thing down significantly before you would have been able to get this thing to seal. You might have been able to get it, but it just wasn't really good at all. You don't want to mess around with your flares. So like this is the factory one on the right, and then the one we just did. They're about the same diameter. Now we have the proper flare nut. So the difference between the flare nut that came with the line set and then the one for the mini split is just, I think this one looks a little bit heavier duty. Here's one more close-up of the end of that flare. And then you can see how it sits there in the bottom of the flare nut. So this one is good to go. we'll just repeat several times now. So again, I'll put a link in the description to the different tools that you might be needing. In the meantime, if you want to learn some more copper pipe and plumbing related videos, I'll put a couple options here on the screen. So we'll see you over there in just a few seconds. If you found this to be helpful, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Alright, see you right over there.